Chapter 2: The environment in which projects operate. Okay, so organizations have a strategic objective, and to achieve that project, they align their projects, programs, portfolios, subprograms, and operations towards that objective. Now, projects are part of that grand scheme, so projects cannot be managed in isolation. So, project managers need to use systems thinking, that is, taking a holistic view of carrying out projects within the context of the organization. And they must make sure that they get enough support from the executive and sponsor and senior management, and it's not one way, it's two-way scheme. So senior managers must make sure that projects continue to support current business needs, and if they are not in line with the strategic objective, then the projects need to align themselves with the strategic objective. Here's a system view of project management. The systems approach emerged in 1950 to describe a more analytical approach to management and problem solving. So it has three parts. It has systems philosophy, systems analysis, and systems management. Philosophy is basically an overall model of thinking about things as a system. Analysis involves problem solving approach, and management involves address business, technological, organizational issues before making changes to the system. Okay, so we are talking about existing of a project in an organization, and the organization supports a project in multiple ways. We have talked about PMO, program management, portfolio management, and here's another technique. We have three basic organization structures. We have functional, project, and metrics. So the primary difference between these three is the role of project manager and the authority attributed to the project manager. We will go through them one by one. So in the functional organization, there are functional managers, and project coordination happens between functional manager. Functional manager, as an example, you may say there's a design manager, and there's an administration manager, so there's a finance manager, and they have their own functional staff. And project coordination happens between the functional manager. So the communication is basically one way. I mean, the staff reports to the function manager, and the function manager coordinate with the other functional managers to get the project done. And project managers really don't have authority in this type of organization, and they are part of a particular function. So project management might be one of those functions. Okay. Here we have matrix organization. It reflects a blend of functional and projectized characteristics. So it is somewhere between functional and projectized characteristics. As we know that in functional organization, the project manager does not have authority. In projectized organization, it's totally opposite, and project manager is the central figure and reaps all of the power and authority. Matrix is somewhere in between, so they can be classified in three further groups, that is weak, balanced, or strong, depending on the relative level of power and influence between functional and project managers. Okay, in a weak matrix organization, we have a typical functional organization, and the project coordination happens between staff among different functions. As you can say in the gray box, that signifies project coordination. A weak matrix organization is closer to that of a functional organization. Project manager does not have authority and power over resources, and he assumes or she assumes the role of a coordinator or an expediter. The key difference between expediter and a coordinator is that an expediter does not have any say, whereas a coordinator has some degree of influence over decision making. Okay, the second type is balanced metrics organization. So you can see that the project manager is part of a certain function and he coordinates with the staff and other functions to complete the project activities. In a balanced metrics organization, it recognizes the need of a project manager. So, in contrast to a weak metrics organization, where we had an expediter and a coordinator, now in balanced metrics organization, we have a project manager, and it does not provide the project manager with the full authority over the project and project funding. Okay, this brings us to strong metrics organization. As you can see that there are parallels in the organization structure. There are functional managers, they have their staff, and then there are project managers. And the project managers report to the manager of project managers, and all of them altogether report to the head of the organization. Strong metric organization refers to authority of a project manager, where the project manager has authority to make decisions and spend fundings and employ staff from multiple functions to perform the project activities. Strong metric organizations are similar to projectized organization. So a strong metrics basically refers to project manager enjoying more authority and power over the functional managers. Okay, here we have projectized organization. In a projectized organization, there are multiple projects being executed in an organization, and each one is headed by a project manager. And everyone reports to the project manager, and project manager has the full authority over resources and fundings. In a projectized organization, team members are often co-located. Most organization resources are involved in project work, and project managers have a great deal of independence and authority. Virtual collaboration techniques are often used to accomplish the benefits of co-located teams. Projectized organizations often have organizational units called departments, but they can either report directly to the project manager or provide support service to the various projects. Then we have composite organizations. This type of organization you would see very often. Almost all organizations, especially the large ones, are composite in nature. So you'd see weak metrics, balanced metrics, functional, productized, all sort of organization types in within an organization. So in a composite organization, it involves all structures at various levels. Okay, organizational process assets. This is a term that you will come across very frequently in your PMP preparation. So, what are these? These are the plans, processes, policies, procedures, and knowledge bases specific to and used by the performing organization. As you may understand, that organization creates data such as lesson learned and historical information, completed schedules, risk data, earned value data, procurement data. So these are input to most of the planning processes, and throughout the project team members may update and add to the organization process assets as necessary. Okay, what are enterprise environmental factors? So when I think about environmental factors, I think about environment in which the project lives and does not influence on those factors. Instead, the project is influenced by those factors. So these refer to conditions not under the control of project team that influence, constrain, or direct the project. So this is also one of those terms that you will come across very frequently in your PMP preparation, along with organization process assets. Here are some examples of environment factors: organizational culture, structure, governance, geographic distribution of facilities, government or industry standards, and so on and so forth. So every project has stakeholders. Stakeholders are those people or organizations which can be in a certain way affected by the project. There are stakeholders which have a great deal of authority over the project and they can influence, and there are stakeholders who have great deal of interest in the project but cannot affect the project in one way or another. So there are different types of stakeholders, and project managers should come up with uh, a technique to manage each one of them. The process starts with identification of stakeholders. This is part of one of the processes that we will go through in our further studies. In this image, you can see that we have a project team. Project team is typically comprised of the project management team, the project manager, and other project management members. Sponsor is probably the most important project stakeholder because he has a very high interest and a very high authority over the project. Among other stakeholders, you can see portfolio manager, program manager, PMO, customers, functional managers, sellers. So to sum it up, it's very important for the project manager to manage stakeholders and identify the relationship between stakeholders and the project. Okay, so how do we measure project success? Simply put, project success should be measured against the objective against which the project was authorized. It's typically the business case in the project charter. So, since projects are temporary in nature, the success of project can be measured in terms of completing the project within the constraint of scope, time, cost, quality, resource, as approved between the project managers and the senior management, and to ensure realization of benefits of undertaken project. A test period can be part of the total project time before handling it over to the permanent operations. Project success should be referred to the last baselines approved by the authorized stakeholders. The project team includes the project manager and the group of individuals who act together in performing the work of the project to achieve its objectives. So it's important to understand who includes and does not include among the project team. So these are those people who perform the project activities to achieve its objectives. They include the project manager, project management staff, and other team members who may not be necessarily involved with management of the project, but are involved in activities to achieve its objective. Project teams include roles such as project management staff, project staff, supporting experts, customer representatives, sellers, business partner members, or business partners. Okay, so composition of project teams depends on organization structure. In some cases, project management team is headed by a project manager and would have full authority over its members. In other cases, project manager may have little or no direct authority over the team members and may have been brought in to lead the project on a part-time basis or under contract. So it all depends on nature of a project and in the project need. So basic project team composition can be dedicated or part-time. I would assume that for large scale projects, it is a dedicated team, and for small part-time process improvement, internal projects, it might be a part-time role. Okay, project lifecycle is the series of phases that a project passes through from initiation to its closure. It's important to mention the plan, do, check, act cycle in project lifecycle, where planning takes place in the initial phases of the project, and then the plan is put to execution along with its monitoring and control, and finally it goes to closure. The characteristic of project lifecycle can be mapped to the generic lifecycle. So you would start a project and you would organize and prepare. Uh, this is synonymous to planning, and then you would carry out the work that is executing, monitoring, and control. And finally, it's the project closure, where the project lifecycle terminates. Okay, here we have a generic representation of different phases of a project. So, an output of starting the project phase is project charter. A project charter typically authorizes a project, formally authorizes a project, and the phase following is planning the project, and the key output is project management plan that enters into the execution phase, and the output is accepted deliverables, and finally those deliverables are accepted, and the data is archived in project documents. As you can see that these phases are plotted on time, and as the time passes by, the cost of performing those activities significantly increase, then finally going to zero once the project is closed. Okay, so this is called influence curve. So you can see as we move along the project timeline, the cost of changes significantly increase, and risk and uncertainty associated with objectives decrease as we move along the timeline. Risk and uncertainty typically decrease because as we move along, scope definition gets better, engineering definition gets better, so it decreases the uncertainty associated with the scope. And if any change is brought about in later stages of the project, it will cost way more than if the same change is brought about in the earlier stages of the project. Project may be divided into number of phases, as we talked about in the project life cycle. It's a collection of logically related project activities that culminates in the completion of one or more deliverables. Here, example of a single phase project starts with the initiating processes, goes through planning processes, execution processes, and reporting processes, and the monitoring and control processes are spread all over the project timeline. This is an example of a single phase project, and project typically would have a number of sequential phases. Okay, so phases might be sequential or overlapping. Sequential phase is basically where accepted deliverables from one phase authorize the subsequent phase of a project. So there is no overlap in a sequential relationship. So a finish of one phase authorizes start of the subsequent phase. In contrast, overlapping relationship sequence project phase typically overlap among them. Here is an example of a three-phase project where the first phase is facility decommissioning, subsequent is waste removal cleanup, and the final is landscaping. And you can see that those initiating, planning, executing, closing, and monitoring control processes are employed in a different rigor in each of those phases. So as we saw in the earlier slide, they might be sequential or overlapping. It all depends on the project need. Here's an example of overlapping relationship, and as we talked about earlier, um, this is in contrast to sequential relationship, and project phases will overlap each other. That means that both of those phases will be in execution at some point in time in the project life cycle. Okay, in a predictive life cycle, it's one in which the project scope and time and cost required to deliver the scope are determined as early in the project life cycle as practically possible. So this is basically done to reduce uncertainty associated with the outcomes of time, cost, and scope. So as you may remember from the earlier slides that the cost of change in the later stages of a project are much more than if the same change is done earlier in the project life. So to to minimize the uncertainty and to control the outcomes in a predictive life cycle, we try to plan and determine the scope as early as possible in the project life cycle. Okay, iterative and incremental life cycles. To understand that, let's assume that there is an IT project, and IT projects have a lot of requirements gathering, the number of stakeholders, and their requirements are not thoroughly known in contrast to construction projects. So, the project manager or the project team will intentionally repeat one or more project activities as the project team's understanding of the product increases. So, this is synonymous to a learning curve. So, as you perform activities multiple times, so your understanding of the product will increase. So, why would the project team do that? The basic benefit behind this is to increase functionality of the project. It will increase utility of the product. Okay, adaptive life cycles are used in those environments where there's a high level of change, and there's a high stakeholder environment, and they are also known as change-driven or agile methods. And you may have noticed that agile is a talk of town these days. This is a new project management methodology. Project culture affects project in multiple ways. It is a set of shared assumptions, values, and behaviors that characterize the functioning of an organization. Experts believe the underlying causes of many companies' problems are not the staff but the culture. So, culture is typically instilled by the leadership team, and since they are a leadership team, their examples are followed by those who work under them. So it is widely believed that the organization culture is created by the leadership team. Okay, a project manager will have to spend a lot of time in stakeholder management. It basically means that how we would go along planning our stakeholder management, how would we go along identifying them, how would we gauge their requirement, and what type of technique we will use to manage those requirements. Top management commitment is very important for success of a project. Top management would have to provide and commit resources. Money is a very, very important resource. Project management may have to escalate issues to top management as well. So if top management is not committed enough, it may end up with a failed project. Okay, so the top management should provide adequate resources. They should approve unique project needs in a timely manner, and they should get the cooperation from other parts of the organization, and mentoring and coaching on leadership issues. It's very, very important. And there's another thing which is extremely important is the culture that top management brings into the organization. And since the project lives in an organization, so that culture may be a deciding factor in success or failure of a project. Senior management can encourage use of standard forms and softwares for project management. The development and use of guidelines for writing project plans or providing status information and creation of project management office or center of excellence. So, senior management role is somewhat similar to a PMO who would provide with standard processes, procedures, guidance, and mentoring. Uh, Project lifecycle is a collection of project phases, and each project phase will have multiple activities. They will have deliverables. The project phase will also define at what time a particular deliverable will be created and how that deliverable will be controlled and approved after each phase. Um, a deliverable is a product or service produced or provided as part of a project.